Thanks for joining us today on The Perfect X. My name is Sherry, and this is my co host, Leigh.
Greetings, Internet.
And today we are going to talk about forgiveness.
Mm,
It's a good one.
yes, because neither of us do it. So,
I have it on my notes here to ask if you do it because I actually don't know if you do it or not. I've
spoiler
actually
alert.
I've never really seen you that mad. I've seen you get like irritated at a situation, but I've never actually seen you really mad at a person.
No, I don't get mad. I just we'll get into it, but I essentially the short Coles Notes version. If you want to hear it and then hang up, it's basically the. I think that for me, I'm very much like I've not when I was younger, but in older years now, like I kind of quickly decide. Well, not even quickly, but if I decide someone's sort of. We've talked about this before too, but if I sort of decide someone's in such a way that like doesn't mesh with my personality or whatever, I don't waste effort trying to change them or convince them I'm right, they're wrong, or whatever. I just kind of like move them out of my circle pretty quickly, you know.
Yeah.
So instead of
Yeah.
getting into a big thing, I'm just like, this person's like fine. This person's a bit much for me. I'm just gonna I can see them at a party and say, hey, how's it going? But I'm not gonna go out of my way to hang out with them, right? You know.
I'm like the opposite. I'm always like open to hang out with people and connect and whatever. But forgiveness, and this is so interesting for me. Like forgiveness is so hard for me. And I know, but what makes it so weird for me is that I know how essential forgiveness is for a healthy relationship. And I also fully understand that as humans, it's impossible to interact and connect with people, whether you're close or even as an acquaintance, without making mistakes. Like I truly believe that people make mistakes without ill intent.
Hmm.
And that's why I find it so confusing that I myself have such a hard time to forgive people.
Yeah, it is true. Like it's you could say something like which you and I both do, like with no real intention behind it, and then it upset somebody, and you're like, oh, there's nothing meant by it. It was just a comment, you know.
Exactly.
But it's funny because we're both like that, where we can say something that would offend someone, but again, we're not easily offended. But if someone like crosses us, that's kind of it, right? You know. But I think
Yeah.
I
And
think you can
I'm
kind
so
of
quick to end it then.
yeah. I think I mean. I know a lot of people say like you can forgive, but you don't forget. And I don't think that's deliberate. I think it's just people like you and I, like if we were to like acknowledge that someone made a mistake and it was unintentional and the whatever, like we're willing to move past it. But I feel like it doesn't. It takes a lot longer for it to sort of like leave our consciousness and
Yes.
trust them, and you let your guard down again. Like there's a lot of people where I'm like that guy kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but you kind of move past it. But it does sit with me for a long time before I feel like it's kind of you'd have to have a lot of good interactions to kind of wash that away.
You know what's really interesting, like in a relationship, so like if an actual boyfriend thing, like with friends, I'm the exact same way with you because like because with friends you have more leeway into make like you don't have to forgive them right away. You know what I mean? You don't
Yeah,
have to spend time with them. You can continue to be friends, but maybe not hang out as much.
right.
But with family and with like a boyfriend, you do have to continue spending time together. It's not like I can be like, okay, I'll just see him like once a month now.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
with a friend you can distance. And with a boyfriend, I've always noticed with like past relationships, I will forget once I decide, like, okay, like they said sorry, we forgive. I may actually forgive and move forward and trust whatever. But the moment that they fuck up a little bit,
Hmm.
I will bring up everything. I won't just start the fight from like, so it's like essentially I never forgave them. I just put it aside and then with my perfectly seamlessly good memory will bring up every detail. It could be like literally from 1995 and I'm like, do you remember? And I do that with family members too. Like when I had to like really train myself like with like when I want to like fight with my sister for instance and like
Yeah.
I'll bring some and she doesn't have a good memory but I'll be like 17 years ago on this day and I could like
It was
and
a
she's
balmy
like
Tuesday.
yeah, it was with like overcast and like I can go into the exact so that's not actually forgiving, and it's like I actually know that I'm the one in the wrong in that moment because she's like, well, aren't we talking about me being late for 15 minutes today and not
Yeah,
how
yeah.
I forgot to pick you up from your dance class exactly at that time when you were 8 years old? Like I it really gets that deep, and I hate this aspect of me, and I think it's, like, the most unhealthiest way to move forward with someone because it's actually not forgiving at all, it's just, like, kind of weaponizing something to be used later,
Well,
you
so
know?
much of what I think of people is not there's a few things, but like one is how do people treat me when there's nothing I can do for them? Like they're not,
Ooh,
you know what I mean? Like there's nothing that
yeah.
I have that they want. How do they treat me? And then another is like how does that person behave when they're angry, right? Or when they're mad or whatever. Like I can get into a fight and an argument and think of something like that to say, but I can also stop myself from saying it now, like in, like in later life here, like,
Mhm.
so I think so much of it is what it says about a person is like how they conduct themselves in those moments, like when they're angry or when they they don't need anything from you or whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like that. Those are the kinds of people. Those are the kinds of moments where I think it like defines more like the person's real
Do you
character.
mean
So
like do you mean like if you're angry, like you could say or do something against the person, but you see that they respect you enough not to? Is that what you mean? Like,
yeah, like if
I
I've
see,
had
I see what you're
arguments
saying.
with people or they've had arguments with me where I know that they could say something like that, but it's more telling of their character if they don't. Like if they can,
It's funny you say that because I actually have a guy I dated, and I knew he could always say something to me that he was well aware of, and during any argument, that was the one thing he never brought up. He never, and the whole time we dated, did that.
yeah,
And out of everything, I always respected him for it because I always waited for him to use that against me. He never did. And
yeah,
I actually say a lot of shitty things about him, but I always tell my friends, but he actually never did that one thing. And you're right. It actually gave me a lot of respect for him.
yeah.
And
I think it says a lot about a person.
it does say a lot about their character. And it is true, like, when I was younger too, I was like you. I would say things I knew about people. Like, maybe I as a friend, I won't, or as a, like, a boyfriend or girlfriend or family member, I won't judge you for something that I know is important to you or embarrassing to you or something like that.
Hmm.
But when I was younger, when I was fighting, I would then use that exact thing to belittle you in a fight.
Like
And as
all
you get
bets are off,
older,
right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's
And
I think that's like a lot of young people are like that. Like they don't know how to holster certain things. Like, and I was like
yeah,
that when I was young. Like I didn't really know how to where the line was. Like if I was mad, it would just open the floodgates, right? I would say
right?
whatever well, that's why your girlfriend left you. You know what I mean, or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I just said pass the fucking saw you. So like I was like that too. It was like it was on or off. If I was
But
pissed
it's
off,
you
it
are
was just
true. It speaks volumes because now as an adult, I do agree with you because I know that if I go that deep, I don't plan on ever talking to that person again.
yeah,
But if someone doesn't, I do have so much respect for them for not doing it. And it allows you to move forward and trust that person more. So it is something I didn't think about that when I was like thinking about this topic, but you are right. It's a real character defining moment on yourself if
yeah.
you do
I
use
think
those
so.
things.
Like I just
Yeah.
think there's lots of things I think about how it's one thing to say anything in the moment, anything that I'll do this or I'll do that or whatever, but to do how you conduct yourself in the moment, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
difference for a lot of people's personality. I think like I respect people that like like say just for example like you're listening to these prison podcasts where a dude could roll on another person and like get less time and they don't. It's
Hmm.
like that's the real like when you're really in the shit and you still stick to your guns. Like I've heard these people say, yeah, if I rolled on this guy, I would have got like 10 years less. But I just
Yeah.
didn't. I didn't
Yeah.
owe him
Yeah.
anything, but I just that's not how I roll, right? And
You're
I
not
just
a
think
rat.
yeah, I just think it's so much character build. It's so much
Defining.
it says a lot about someone's character that they could even if it doesn't, it doesn't serve like it would if you're going to say something about someone in an argument and you get one up, you know what I mean, and you still don't do it, like that's tough. That's hard to do mentally to not pull that card.
That is so true. It's so true, so true. That is so true. You know what's really interesting is when I was like looking into this topic, one which I didn't even know, one of the definitions of forgiveness actually means to let go.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part of forgiveness. It's the like the letting go part. Like, you know,
I think that just
you
takes a lot
can't
more time. That's something that like you could forgive someone in a relatively short period of time. But I think like the forget side of it, like the move on side of it, could be years later. But it doesn't mean that you should bring it up at every turn. But I think it's just knowing that it nothing but time is gonna make that go away, right?
Well, so that was interesting because I mean, when we'll go through them, like the tips and tricks on how to move forward, right? So,
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
mean, I personally myself wanted to know, like, how can I fucking forgive people, move forward? And
yeah,
exactly one of the things that it says is that accepting the fact that you can forgive someone in the moment, but it doesn't mean you're okay with the actual experience of it.
yeah,
And so it doesn't mean that in that moment you have to let go of how you feel in order for you guys to move forward. You can it or it also doesn't mean that you accept the behavior.
yeah,
So you can forgive without being ready to take the next steps, but
yeah,
you do need to actually understand that there is forgiveness being given. And
yeah.
that doesn't mean like not moving forward or ever again with that person. It just
Well,
means like I can take the next steps to move forward with
I
you.
think some people too, like they say, "I forgive this person," or, "I forgive you for saying whatever," and then they don't really feel better themselves right away. It's important to, I think, to realize that, like, you forgive someone is step 1. You say,
Yeah,
"Listen, man, I understand that wasn't how that was you intended that to go down. I get you're sorry. Like, let's just move past. Let's do our best to move past it, right?" But if you still have shitty feelings about it for a while after, that's not unusual. I think that you just got to accept that that's part of the process. Like, just
yeah,
forgiving them and saying, "I understand what happened. I get that wasn't your intention." That's step one. Like, it doesn't mean it's not. I don't think it's unusual for that feeling to not go away just because you said you forgave them. But I think when you bring it up in a fight or something later, 3 months later, 6
that's
months later,
weaponizing it.
it's weaponizing it and it
Yeah.
starts that process over again.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually one of the hardest things. Like, I remember when I was younger, I wouldn't want to forgive people because I felt like it meant that I was okay with it. And like moving forward, like we're just going to be all buddy buddy again.
Yeah,
And then as I got older, I realized that actually giving people forgiveness means giving them the grace in the moment,
yeah,
but that we can then slowly take the process of letting it go. And it didn't mean I was okay with the behavior.
yeah,
It didn't mean like me saying that I forgive you meant that I'm okay with you hurting me. It meant
and
that
you can
I
do
will
it
give you
again.
yeah, yeah. Instead, it means like I'll give you the grace, and in time, I'll give you the trust that I believe that you won't do it again. Or
Yeah,
I give you the trust that you didn't do it intentionally. You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah.
And that's actually understanding that made me feel like, oh, that's what the actual first step of forgiveness means. It's the grace, you
I can
know?
imagine, like, it's probably hard for people that forgive someone and it doesn't make the feelings go away right away. I think you you
Hmm.
you would confuse that with, like, "I can't let that go." It's like, no, like, forgiveness is a many steps, I think, and the only thing, like, I always like everyone says, but I always lean on is, like, that time is the only thing that's really gonna fix everything, like, you could
Yeah.
forgive someone today, but it's gonna take time for that those feelings to subside, and you just gotta accept that just because they didn't go away at the flick of a switch doesn't mean there's more to it. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's still a problem, or you don't like that person or whatever. You just got to know that these things, some things, just it's only time that can deal with it.
They feel less in time kind of
They
thing.
do, and but weaponizing them and bringing them up in the moment, the heat of the moment, in arguments, I feel like that restarts that process.
Well, actually, what's really interesting is with the research I did, one of the first steps it said that in order to forgive is actually accepting the fact that it hurts you and feeling the pain. So
Yeah,
instead of brushing it off, you have to actually externally feel it because if you brush it off, it will make you keep bringing it back up. You will, and then it'll turn into resentment. So
yeah,
if you try to act like it didn't hurt you or you try to ignore that pain, then it's going to keep coming up, coming up, coming up because you're like, well, fuck that. I didn't actually process the feeling of it. So actually going through going through the feeling of it and letting the time pass as it slowly hurts less and less is actually essential to get to that point where you forgive them
mhm,
versus just trying to brush it off and exploding later because you try to ignore something that you actually truly feel.
yeah,
So that actually is so important. Like you need that time. You need to let it hurt. You need to it's like a roller coaster. It's not a straight line. Like maybe today it'll hurt a little bit less. Like when the
mhm,
person apologized, you're like, okay, I feel like I'm mostly over it. But then in a week, it'll pop back in your mind and it hurts a little bit more than it did the day you thought you forgave them. It's actually the time and the process of them seeing if they do it again
mhm.
that'll really allow you to heal.
Yeah, and that's the only real true test is that, you just gotta, like you say, trust them that they it was an honest mistake, or that they are sorry. But yeah, like time again, like time will tell. You get to 6 or 12 months down the road or whatever it is, and those feelings will be a lot less, and then by that time it hasn't been an issue again. So you've got that reassurance as well.
Yeah, that was another thing too, like, it was saying, like, once you see in time that the trust is regained, it's easier to forgive, right? So,
Hmm.
like, you're like, "Oh, like, that person didn't actually mean to hurt me." Like, because you can see, like, 6 months has gone by, and it's like, "Oh, they didn't do it again." So now it
Yeah,
hurts a little less.
and some
Um,
people, like, as long as they're not like habitual with things, like if they said threw something back in your face and then they didn't do it again, but they throw other things in your face, well, that's like no, really not really any better, But a lot of people make a genuine mistake and try to move forward from it, then that's fine.
Yeah, like, I know, like, for me, like, sometimes I'll make a joke that in the moment to me was so funny, and if someone pulls me aside and was like, "Hey, actually, that really hurt my feeling. Can you please not do it again?" I usually, like, with my very close friends, I'm like, "Look, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
Mhm.
But that joke is in my head, so it might happen again in the
Uh-huh.
near future, but I promise you I'm gonna take the steps." And usually I actually never do it again, but just because sometimes, like, something becomes part of my act, like, I know
Yeah,
it sounds bad, but it's like, I make that joke, like, 5 times, and maybe on the 5th time you were like, "Okay, actually, it's not funny to me." I'm like, "Well, shit, I've kinda got in the habit of making that joke, so I apologize now. I need the time to make sure it falls from my head." And usually I
yeah.
actually never do it again, but I just wanted to be clear that if it happens again, it's because I made the mistake of getting it in my it's, like, stuck in my
It
head
wasn't
now.
intentional, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
so just give me, like, a month to,
All
like,
you can do
fully
is
process.
try, right? Like, if people
Yeah.
see that you're making an effort, I think that goes a long way.
Or, like, I have friends that I'm like, I really get offended when they're late, and they're like, "Listen, I'm gonna make the effort not to do it again." But again, it may happen a little bit here and there, but it's, like, understanding that they're putting the effort, and then, like, really seeing, like, if overall, like, 8 out of 10 times they're on time, well, those 2 times you gotta kinda, like, give them
Right.
grace
Yeah,
too,
you
right?
can meet them in the middle somewhere, yeah,
Yeah,
it's fine if
yeah,
they're trying, that's a huge part of it.
yeah. The other thing that it was saying was, like, actually, which is really interesting, is, like, put yourself in the other person's shoes. So, like, which is kind of like you do forget. Like, I know that for me, I'm like, well, how the fuck are people late? Like, how is that even a thing? But if I put myself in that other person's shoe and how they maybe they say, like, go back to, like, how their upbringing is, like, maybe in their family time was really not a thing. Like, maybe they weren't raised where that issue was a problem. Or, like, for instance, it could be something else. Like, maybe that guy's dad always cheated and the mom always forgave him. So cheating wasn't actually like a detrimental break for a relationship, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And kind of putting yourself in that person's shoes. I'm not saying like cheating is okay, but trying to understand how that person was raised and what their environment was, and maybe how that issue really impacted. Like, maybe for them, it's really not an issue. They weren't raised where that was an issue, right? So they have to then reverse and kind of re-educate themselves on an issue and see how that behavior would affect someone else. And that also takes time. And if you put yourself in that person's shoe and kind of understand their upbringing, or kind of understand why they would make such a mistake, or they once they explain it to me, you give them a little bit of empathy towards the issue versus anger, you're more easily going to understand why they were to make that mistake. And cheating is a big one. Like, it's a very hard one to go that far to try to understand. But maybe, like, I mean, like, we try to make these topics simple. Like, yes, it's joking. Maybe they come from a family where everything was funny, so it
yeah.
wasn't rude, or they were late, so everything was,
That was
like,
just
not
normal.
normal, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna bring in the cheating because this is a relationship podcast, and sometimes people really they do grow up in those environments. Like, I actually know people where, unfortunately, the dad always cheated and the mom just lived with it. It wasn't a thing. Like, that was the way their family was, and it didn't,
Mhm.
in his eyes, seem to bother the mom because she stayed with him. She knew of it. She stayed with him. So when he had a girlfriend, his way of love and understanding of love was that this was not a detrimental part of the relationship. And I
Yeah.
remember the first time he cheated on his girlfriend, and he was like, but it's, yeah, I know it's a bad thing to do, but it happens in relationships. And you had to really educate him that no, this does not happen in relationships. Like, this is not okay for everyone. This is not a way to, someone doesn't feel loved once they're being cheated on. And he had to really re educate himself. And now, like, I know him 8 years later, he's never done it, but it took him a long time to kind of understand how detrimental that action was, you know?
Well, so many
And
things about you breaking these childhood sort of opinions or like understandings of the world, right? That's why, growing up is what it is. I think it's so hard to like break out of that mold of what you think to be normal behavior, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, and it really is, like, I remember, like, when the first girlfriend they cheated on, he was, like, shocked at how, like, it really ruined the relationship and everything, and it's not that like, people always say, like, "Oh, well, eventually you become an adult and you see what's around you," and that is true, like, we're not in the fucking ice ages, like, you have Instagram, you know what is right and wrong, like, socially accepted, what's not, but actually going through the methods of understanding it and really kind of making that who you are 2 different things, like,
Yeah.
really understanding how that can affect a person, you know, and for him, like, I remember, like, he was really thinking that, like, yeah, I know it's not a great thing, but it's a normal thing. Like for him, it was very normal. And he had to really understand that it's actually not normal. And that
Yeah.
takes time, you know? And I know him now as like a husband. He is nothing like he was before. And people, I don't ever judge him for that. Like, I know he's still a good person. He always was a good person, but he did have to re educate himself on the norms of society.
Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of so much of it for me has always been like people's intention. Like if the being late thing, if you say that, that's a problem for me, and people's attitude is like, we tough shit. It's like, that's fucked. Like, okay, you don't want to make any effort. Like your attitude is, I'm late, deal with it. Okay, well then I'm not going to get into an argument with those people. I'm just going to move on with my life. I'm not making plans with you anymore. And I've cut people out of my life that
mhm.
was their attitude. It's like, hey, I'm late, fucking deal with it. It's like, how? Okay, fuck you then, right? Because I used to waste my effort trying to convince people that they're wrong and I'm right. And I'm like, you know what?
Mhm.
Now instead of having a blowout, I just move them into a whole other box. I'm like, you know what? You're over there now. Like if I see you at a party, it's, hey, how's it going? What's up? But that's it. Like, and I think it's important to state your feelings and state your case and give them a chance to work with you. And if they have no intention to, you got to know when to pull the cord as well.
That is true, like, we are talking about forgiveness, but it's actually very true, like, if someone's not asking or seeking forgiveness or their habits are continued, you don't owe them the grace. Like,
Yeah.
we're talking about if they change, but if
Yes.
they're not making the change or making the effort or communicating why they're making those mistakes,
Hmm.
then you don't owe them that grace either. You also have to have, like, a boundary, like we spoke on another episode, and
Yeah.
respect yourself. Like, there is a difference between someone seeking forgiveness and
Hmm.
someone who is just saying I'm sorry just to shut you up or
Right.
not even
Respects it.
saying I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Like I think it's important to, like you say, like if someone it wants forgiveness and is going to do what it takes to get some forgiveness and all that, that's one thing. But if some people are either say they want to be forgiven and they're going to make a change and don't, or just blatantly tell you they're not going to change, that's you gotta know when you're whipping a dead horse.
Yeah, and give it time too, like, if they're trying to give the change, like, they're
Yeah,
trying to make the
yeah,
change.
it
Like,
takes
when I say,
time.
like I tell people, like, "Let me get the joke out of my head." Really, honestly, 99% of the time, I never ever make up that joke again, but
Hmm.
I know that it may slip up, so you have to also give the person the grace to make the changes, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, give yourself the grace to not let someone in your life if they're not making that effort at all. And there is a difference. I mean, we're all smart enough to know there's a difference. Like, if like, I mean, this is like I hate to bring up like the Kardashians, but like, I always think of like that her Khloe Kardashian, I think his name was Tristan, like he cheated on her over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, move the fuck on. I don't know how she came
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Like the guy
Like how
is
many
not
times
making the
yeah,
effort.
like, like
Yeah.
people make mistakes and things happen and whatever, but how many sort of it's like people like I listen to a lot of these like podcasts about people like getting into trouble with the law and stuff and this girl's on today and she's like, "Oh yeah, I was a college student, I got like a DUI or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, that happens. Like people are stupid, they make bad decisions, they have one or two drinks more than maybe they should, they go driving." And then she starts, but I'm like, this girl was in jail. Like, how the fuck was she in jail, right? And it turns out, oh, well, she had probation and she was supposed to do certain courses and certain amounts of community service, and so like didn't do them. I'm like, how many fucking chances do you want, right? Like, you got caught doing
Yeah.
something like drinking and driving, which could have been very serious, could have killed somebody. And
And
then
she
you
didn't
have,
make the effort to change. She didn't
and
do any of the steps.
yeah, like she seemed like genuinely like, unhappy that she had been drinking and driving and obviously wouldn't do that again, but had to go she was supposed to go through these various programs as part of probation to sort of, as was part of her punishment. and she openly was like, "Well, I had these courses I didn't finish, and then like some other thing." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, well then there's really no help for you. Like you try. Yes, you're not drinking and driving, but like it's a pretty straightforward road to follow to what the court wants you to do. So some people it's like." Yes, you got to look for the effort, but other people are just like, blatantly
You
not
have to
making the effort.
You mean like they're not doing the road to redemption? She wasn't showing that she's sorry. Like if you're
Yeah.
accountable and you're sorry for something, you know that and most of the times when you are sorry and you're taking accountability, there are steps to take in order to show that you're sorry. And if
Yeah.
they're not taking the steps, like she's not doing, maybe she can drink and drive again, but she's actually not taking accountability because she's also not doing the simple fucking thing she has to do, like taking these courses to prove that she's taking accountability and knows that she made a mistake, and you have to do something to apologize, and those actions are the apology, which is taking the fucking courses. So
Well,
I
I think
understand.
that's where the court ended up. Like she ended up getting like 20 months in jail or something like that.
I don't blame
And
them.
the court's opinion was that like you had so many times to like redeem yourself. Like we gave you simple things to do. You blatantly didn't do them. Like what's and I haven't got all the way through the podcast yet, but like it's ultimately like to tie into the forgiveness thing. It's like if you're making an effort and you're taking steps to do the right thing, that's important, right? But if you're basically not, like you're not doing the simply if someone asks you to not make that joke again, there's a difference between letting one slip and fitting in every sentence where you can, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so true.
Yeah,
That is
and
so
that's
true.
that's it. Like you gotta forgiveness is important, but like you said already, like you gotta know like when to cut the cord. Like these people don't want to make any sort of changes. They don't want to be part of your life enough to straighten up that thing that is a concern for you. Then that's fine. That's who they are. That's what they want to do. But don't waste your energy on that.
That's true. That's true.
Hmm.
Another thing it said, which I thought was really interesting, because I believe that life is meant to experience. And so I do think that we are meant to make mistakes and we are meant to learn from them. And I found this kind of really interesting because I always try to, when something bad happens to me, try to find what I learned from that situation and find some gratitude in it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, like had this not happened, like I know when my dog got sick, the way he got sick and died, it was the hardest thing I had to deal with, but it did change me for the better. And
Hmm.
so no matter what, I try to appreciate every experience because that's the whole point of life is to experience. But I never thought about it towards forgiveness. Like if someone fucks up. And it was really interesting because in this article it said it's usually easier to move forward when you try to find something that you learned from the experience. So something from
Yeah.
this experience that taught you. So maybe the guy cheats on you and you don't take him back, but you realize something in yourself, like maybe there was a growth in you or something that you were able to learn about yourself through it,
Yeah.
and or learn about the opposite sex through it, or learn about relationships through it, and that understanding and that growth, that acceptance of the experience and overall appreciating of it will allow you to forgive and move on. And again, forgiveness doesn't mean taking the person back. Like maybe you never take him back, but you won't have like hate or anger in your heart towards the experience because you're like, okay, actually, when he cheated on me, it taught me that I also maybe did these four things. Like maybe you neglected the relationship, maybe he asked for something, you didn't give it to him. I'm not saying that those
Yeah.
are excuses for cheating, but
No, but
they
it's how
are.
you got there. Yeah.
Yeah, he chose to cheat, but how you are in a relationship may affect the overall relationship. Maybe not to cheating, but how the other person feels in the relationship. And then it makes you think like I know that I like have like issues of letting people in, so maybe
Hmm.
I'm always a little bit cold, or I always act like I could be fine whether you're in my life or not. And
Yeah.
that may make a guy be like, well, she doesn't like me enough, I might as well cheat. And then maybe after the cheating I'm like, okay, that making people feel like I'm good whether they're in it or not makes them feel neglected and makes them feel less than. And
Yeah.
so I will change my behavior, not again accepting the cheating part, but that experience taught me that in myself,
Hmm.
and that understanding, accepting, and feeling like it's good to learn something about yourself or through the experience will let you move forward in life and maybe appreciate the experience versus being angry towards it.
Yeah, I think exactly. If you could take something from it, then you would put it from the total, disaster compartment over into like the valuable lesson compartment, like, and there is a lesson in almost everything. And it's even if it's just for your own boundaries and be like, okay, well, if I recognize someone's behaving in such a way, early on. You know, I dragged this out and I tried too hard to save this friendship or this relationship, and you could make all kinds of excuses about why that was a waste of time. But then next time you see the signs early, and you're okay. Like I see, I've been down this road before. I'm not doing it again. I'm not wasting a year trying to convince someone to not make this joke or whatever. I'm going to tell them, and if a month later they're still doing it, I'm cutting my losses because they're obviously not interested in changing at all.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I think really if you can find which you exactly, there's a lesson in every experience. Like I really say like for me the hardest thing was what happened with my dog, but
Mhm.
I'm not angry about it happening. I think and it makes me move forward in life in an easier way than if I was angry. Like I remember the first death I experienced in my life was my grandma, and I was so angry at life after, even though she
Yeah,
lived a very great life and she was in her 80s, you know? It's not like
yeah,
she died young, but
mhm,
it was the first time I experienced that and I was angry and it took me 2 years to get over that anger. And I felt like that right after like those 2 years that my other dog died and I was so angry about and I realized like with Patience, who was like my soul, like I always say I have the best family, but Patience, I love them. He's first,
mhm.
you know?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was my everything, and I'm not angry about his death, and it's because I was old enough and mature enough to understand that I experienced and I grew as a person through his illness, and, of course, I wish it's different it didn't happen, but it did
yeah.
happen, and I appreciate the growth of me personally through it, and it allows you to move forward in life without anger, and that's the whole point is to not be angry because being angry and not forgiving a situation and not moving forward with a situation is the unhealthiest. It will literally eat away at you. Like they say that
Mhm.
anger can literally make you physically sick. And so
Yeah.
why would you
There's a
want to
lot of
live like
things like
that?
that where people say that certain emotions manifest in certain ways. You know,
Mhm.
like one would be like you're in your lungs and you have trouble breathing, and it's something, and then another is like So it's interesting. Like, 'cause I don't know enough about it to say one way or the other, but like the things that people say to me that like, oh, like you have this emotional issue, and that manifests itself as like leg pain, and it sounds crazy, but like
It's
it's
true. It's very
it
true.
does seem to be right. Like I'm sort of I'm of the opinion that I don't know. Obviously, don't know enough about everything to know. I don't know everything, right? There's just you just don't, right? So like I'm open to the possibility that like there's things out there that like this that exist, right? You don't know why something manifests itself in a physical way, but it I suppose it could, right? Like it seemed, it's more than once someone said something that seemed very true to me, right?
I believe it. I truly believe it. And I think because there's no way that, I mean, our minds and our gut and everything, all of that is connected. And so, how could we be so angry in our mind and it not come out physically some other way? You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
all our body. I mean, we're not doctors, but our bodies, it works, it functions
yeah,
somehow. You know, your bladder tells you have to pee, it goes into your brain, you get up and you go pee. So it's all
yeah.
connected, you know? So your
It's
brain
yeah,
and your physical aspects are all connected. So it's exactly that. Like you're hungry, you eat something, you physically feel full, you can feel sick if you eat too much. Like it's all fucking connected. So
yeah, yeah,
having anger just it's just the way it's like eating away at your insides and it's going to come out there's no way it won't come out some other way,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
One of the other things that it said, which I actually, because I'm very quick, I'm an Aries, I'm very quick to anger and I'm very quick for little things. Like, I'm not talking about like cheating things, but little tiny things can set me off. And I
Yeah,
know you're like that too. Like, something small will set you off. And
yeah,
just as quickly as we're set off, we let it go, you know? Like, because we
yeah,
know it's something so stupid. And as I get older, have to always remind myself, like, does it matter in 5 years? Like for instance, like I could be so angry, like if my girlfriend is always on time, but the one that day I'm not having an off day and she's like 5 minutes late. I have that quick to temper to like really lose it on her. Like
mhm,
naturally,
yeah,
that's my natural personality. And I always have to pull myself back and be like, okay, like, will this matter in 5 years? And I mean, I can do it with such petty things. Like, if someone calls me 2 times in a row, I can lose my shit. I'll be like, don't you know I fucking caller ID? Like,
yeah, yeah.
I know, you know, like it's
Oh,
over the
I
tiniest
hate phone
things.
calls. If I could get a phone that didn't work as a phone, I'd buy one.
And you know, when someone redials, you're like, what the fuck? Like, clearly, I'm not answering the first time because I'm busy. So you setting it off the second time, I don't know what it is about that little
Oh,
act that will just set me off.
I
And then I
pick it
have
up.
to
I'm like,
remind
you better be fucking dying, because if you're not, you're gonna be.
Well, because we lose it. But when you really think about it, it's just so petty and it's kind of on us. Like it's really not. You have to ask yourself, whatever I'm angry about this moment, is it going to impact my life? Does it define my relationship with this person? Does it define who I am as an individual? Does it define my whole life? No. If it doesn't, then you have to find a way to let it go. And when I was reading all of this, I mean, we've talked about this about something else. I can't remember what, but it's about training yourself. Like we forget that these are things we train ourselves. We have trained ourselves that it's okay to get angry that someone dialed twice. Like we've allowed ourselves to lose it all in that experience, you know?
Yeah.
But you actually can train yourself to do the opposite. Like you have to undo the habit because reality is it's not that big of a fucking deal.
Mhm.
Maybe that person, like it's wouldn't be a big deal to them. And this isn't something like cheating. It's just
Yeah.
hitting your name on the phone because they really want to talk to you because maybe they really missed you. Like I know the people I've snapped at for doing that, and it's usually my poor family members. They're like, "Well, I just really missed your voice, and I really, really wanted to get a hold of you." And it's
At
like,
least
but
you kept calling, like,
I explode on them, and then I'm
oh,
like,
yeah.
actually, like afterwards, I'm like, but it really wasn't that big of a fucking deal. So what if they
No.
dial twice, you know? And I've had to like practice training myself. Like every behavior is training, right? It's like I've trained myself that it's okay to lose it. Now I have to do the opposite. So it's like working out your mind and working out your reactions to do the opposite. And as
Well,
I
that's
was
like I was
learning all
saying,
of this,
sorry,
oh
that's what I was saying about, like, how we people behave in the moment,
yeah,
and that's similar to what you're saying about how to train your mind and things to your reaction because that's something you can learn to control. Like, you and I are
yeah,
impulsive people, and, like, that type of thing doesn't come like that. Our first reaction isn't to think, I'm gonna stew over that, and
yeah,
then I'll come
yeah.
back tomorrow, and if I'm still angry, then I'll say it. I mean, like, there's people out there like that, believe it or not,
Yeah,
but,
yeah,
like,
my girlfriend can be so mad, and she'll be like and she'll even talk to you, but then she'll be like 2 days later, she'll be like, "Now that I've calmed down," you're like, "When were you mad?"
yeah, you like you thought this is you want to. Oh, yeah, I know. I'm the same. I'm just like you. I'm like, you know what? Like, it, I'm as surprised by what comes out of my mouth as everyone else.
Yeah, me
Like this is the first time
too.
hearing of it, right?
Yeah,
But
'cause you're so quick to react. We're very reactional people.
yeah, but on the subject of the forgiveness thing, like I always we've talked about on lots of podcasts, but like with counseling, and even like reading online, like techniques. But there's a technique. It's more for anxiety, but I'm sure it would work like with forgiveness as well. But like when you there's I know a guy that actually had like he had really bad leg pain and they couldn't cure it. It was like a nerve psychological thing. I forget what it's basically like there's a name for it, but he was having some sort of like pain that they couldn't get rid of. So they actually ended up removing part of his leg, like
Oh,
below his
poor
knee or
guy.
something like that. And they still get what they call phantom pain, where it's like you
Mhm.
feel the pain in your foot that's not there anymore.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
what they do in some instances to help with it, I've read about, is it's like your muscles like tense and you can't untense it. So what they like they'll put your leg like next to a mirror and you can see both feet again, like you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
you have it, and then you like mentally like flex that foot that's like gone, and then you mentally relax it, and then it sometimes will make that pain go away, like it's not tense anymore. And there's a lot of in counseling there's things where like you'll I don't remember the whole procedure, but like say you like lay down, close your eyes, whatever, and then you hold your hand um like I don't know if it matters where, but like over your chest or whatever, and then you like put all of these things into your hand, like these ideas, like you sort of like visualize them as like a ball of light or some sort of energy, and you put it like into your hand, and then you like squeeze your hand like as hard as you can probably, and for a certain amount of time. I don't know, I can't remember how long it is, and you're focusing on this issue or these issues being put into your hand, and then when you let go of your hand, like that sort of tension goes away and these issues like release into the world kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's all about like with forgiveness, like I think you can like put these issues in there and use it as like a visual sort of tool to like help sort of release those into the world instead of like stuffing them down, and I've
Yeah.
tried it with anxiety stuff before and it seemed to help. Like I would focus, you sit there with your eyes closed and you do, there's a bunch of steps to it, but essentially that's what you're doing is you're sort of focusing on what this is, and then you're like releasing it, so it kind of like
It
helps,
makes sense.
it
Remember
won't
when
it
we were
won't like
kids,
do
it
it's not
was
100% gone overnight or anything, but
no,
it
no,
does seem to help. It seems to like
it relaxes you in the moment, you're saying.
yeah,
And it makes sense because remember when we were kids, I don't know if they still do this with kids today, but they used to say like breathe and count to 10
yeah,
because that's what you're doing. You're breathing and relaxing your body to relax your mind. That's what
yeah,
that actually 10-second is. And you're just explaining another way of kind of taking that tension, that quick to react, quick to anger tension, and
mhm.
putting it somewhere, you know, like through a technique of releasing it.
Yeah,
And
and I
that's
think there's
exactly what you're
probably
describing.
different ones that work for different people, but I always think of that like phantom pain thing because it reminds me of that. Because I've seen videos of guys doing it with their hands. They've lost a hand, and they same technique. They'll put their hand in front of the mirror, and it looks like they've got both hands, sort of thing,
Mhm.
And it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Like, and then they can sort of flex the imaginary hand, and then let it open it, and it seems to alleviate a bunch of this pain. But
I mean,
it's
the whole
you know,
thing sounds like training mind and physical aspects. That's what you're
yeah.
pretty much coming down to
Yeah,
and
and
releasing it.
I think in a lot of there's so many cultures, almost all the cultures that I can think of, like, have something like that that they've come up with that, like, even some people will write a note and burn the note, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, as
Yeah.
simple as that, right? But it's like it's some sort of psychological way to, like, let go of things.
Yeah. It's really just physical and psycho mentally putting everything together. That's what it sounds like.
It seems
I
like it,
mean,
and there's always in every culture, there's something that's very much like that. It's
yeah.
similar, and they all arrive at very similar conclusions.
I mean, they even have that walk on the hot coal. I don't know what culture it's
Yeah,
from, but like
yeah,
if you tell your mind it doesn't burn, it won't burn. Like
yeah,
obviously we're connected somehow, and the whole point is training yourself, you know?
yeah, yeah.
And it is the thing is like the more I did research on, it, the more I realized like all of this comes down to is practice. Like
Yes, yeah.
really like understanding what forgiveness means and practicing the steps to do it and calming yourself when you feel the instant anger. It's a great way another way of practicing so that you actually understand the difference between like when you should react and when you shouldn't, you know?
Yeah, and, like, don't expect it to solve all your problems overnight. Like, it's gotta be you gotta be willing to, like, try it and come back to it and try it again and come back to it and try it again until, like, you'll start feeling improvements. But my hardest thing for any sort of counseling or psychological training I've always found is to have the patience to let it, like, evolve. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't happen immediately. Like, you're not just gonna find some way to make this shit go away. But
Yeah.
I want to do more. It's a lot like going to the gym and things where like you go in once and throw a bunch of weight around, like it's really not going to do anything. But like if you sort of practice and refine and are consistent, I imagine because I don't go to the gym, but I imagine that it would be results will follow.
Well, and I just wanna leave on one note too with, like, my last thing I was saying. I know we talk about communication all the time, so I hate to always bring it up again, but I will just say that one thing I did notice, as I got older is when I was younger, I would always yell, like, to get my point across.
Yeah.
You know, it was like the old mentality, the louder you are, the more right you are, and, like, kinda thing, and one I never forget, like, this happened, like, maybe 10 years ago. I had someone tell me, like, if you're yelling, nobody can hear you. And
Yeah.
if you actually want to be heard, you have to say it. And I just remember them saying, and I always used to yell, like that was my thing.
Hmm.
And I never really yelled after that when I was really serious about something. I actually realized like if it's so important to me that I want the person to hear how it makes me feel, that I need to make sure I say it in a tone that they hear. And
Yeah.
people don't hear yelling. So I think my last like note on this topic really, and this is something that really, really helped me move forward. Like now when something upsets me and I communicate it with people in a very calm manner
Hmm.
versus like a reactive yelling tone, I am 80% of the time more likely than not to be understood and heard versus just them trying to shut me up because I'm so high pitched with my high elven and chipmunk's voice, you know?
Yeah.
So like and when you're understood and heard, they're more likely to give you the empathy and make the changes needed for that action not to happen again and you can move forward. And if you really care about someone and you want to move forward, like my one big piece of advice is to make sure you say it calmly when you're not screaming and when you're not yelling so that you're giving them the opportunity to make the changes. Otherwise, they're not even hearing you.
Hmm.
So that is like my last piece of tip.
There you go.
Do you have one, or should we hang up?
No, I've already told you more than I know.
Okay. Well, like always, thank you. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah,
We'll
over and
sign off.
out.
Oh, and we should tell
Yep.
everybody, follow us. Follow us. Follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, the TikTok as we like
Yes,
to
on
say,
MySpace.
on the MySpace.
Yeah.
Um,
Our
and
ICQ number is 7352111.
uh-oh, no, I'm
Uh-oh.
kidding. And then also please make sure that you follow us on Spotify and Apple as well, and share us with your friends.
Yes, share.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.
Yep, see ya. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.